Jonathan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, Seth. It is the height of summer. The days are long. The sun is setting late. And it's really stinking hot. It's so hot.
It's been so hot here too.
And I'm trying not to think about how this probably will be the coldest summer of the rest of my life.
Okay. Thanks, Homer Simpson.
Yeah. Is that wildly depressing? Or what?
Yeah, it is. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, let's change the mood.
Yeah, get us out of here.
With this question. What would you do in this particular situation? Would you want your office to be on the 8th floor of a building, but there's no elevator, or in the basement, but there's one small window up high on the wall, like at ground level?
So in kind of an exaggerated form, you're describing kind of my current office situations. So I'm in a temporary space in an old house on campus that's on the 3rd floor, and the stairs don't have any air conditioning. Just the offices have like individual units. So I had to haul a lot of stuff up a lot of stairs.
Ooh.
It was very hot.
Yeah.
It wasn't 8 floors though. And the office that I may be moving to, it's at least on the possibilities, is on the 1st floor with just, it's not like basement windows though, but it's just windows that are really high up. So I don't know what I'd pick after all that. I would probably go with the basement. As much as I want to think that I would get used to climbing all the stairs all the time, I almost certainly wouldn't. And then I'd just be sad.
Yeah, the basement is a safe bet. I'd probably pick the basement too. And then if you're running late, you just have to go down like a flight of steps
Right.
and you're at your office. As opposed to like you're running late, you got to go up 8. Yeah, I'm with you. And in the event of a fire, you can get out a lot easier.
True. Well, that worked out, I guess.
Yeah.
We need to instill some more debate in these questions again. It's been a while.
I thought that was going to be harder. For our passages this week, we're continuing to move through 2 Samuel. And in this little passage, I'm just going to summarize it really quick. David gathers 30,000 men, and they bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. And then David's like singing and dancing. He's all excited. And he places the Ark in a tent, and he offers sacrifices, and he blesses the people, and then he distributes food to everyone. It's like all in all, very joyful. Except there's this little moment where Saul's daughter sees him dancing and doesn't like that. That's the only little bit of tension in that passage. Similar to last week, our psalm, which is Psalm 24, is also tied to our Old Testament reading really closely. It's asking, who can ascend God's holy mountain? And then it answers that with people with clean hands and pure hearts. But the passage that I'm sort of most interested in this week is just like one of my favorites in terms of its storytelling, maybe in the entire Bible. So I was wondering if we could go back sort of like old times and if you'll read it for us.
Sure, Seth. I'm glad to. This is Mark chapter 6, verses 14 to 29 from the New Revised Standard Version. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. But others said, it is Elijah. And others said, it's a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, "Ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it." And he solemnly swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What should I ask for?" And she replied, "The head of John the Baptizer." Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was deeply grieved. Yet, out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately, the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When the disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Yikes.
I don't even know what to say. Just like, what a crazy story. And I think this undercurrent that we get just a few times, we get little glimpses of, is that Herod, admires, or has this, what I might call a reluctant admiration for John the Baptist.
Yeah.
I find that so interesting to me.
Yeah, that line, when he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him.
Yeah.
Do you think anyone feels that way listening to this show? I don't want to presume that we have the theological depth and insight of John the Baptist. But I do think we could probably be both perplexing and enjoyable.
Yes, that's true. Again, thank you for reading that, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about with that passage is the way that political and religious leaders can be at odds with one another. And I even think sometimes each one may admire something different about the other. I think that I want to think, maybe I should say, that political leaders see religious leaders and as people who are very authentic. I hope they admire that in them. And I also see how religious leaders can look at political ones and admire their ability to really get things done. I often think, and I'll just speak for myself for a minute, that when I try and exert any type of influence in the entire religious sphere, I always say I exert it from the bottom up. I can sort of lift and push gently, and it's the opposite of political leaders who have sort of the impetus to get things done.
Right.
So that's how I've been thinking about this in general. And then my questions were who usually wins when religious and political leaders are at odds? Does someone win in the short term, in the long term? Sort of what methods do they use to influence each other? I was trying to think of... Sorry, now I'm just listing all my questions. And then we'll go back through. And I was trying to think of examples of times when there are particular specific people who we can think of as being at odds with. Either with the religious institution or religious leaders at odds with the political institution. Okay. That was a lot of questions.
Where do you want to go first?
Let's think about how their methods differ. And I wonder if that helps us think about how and who wins in the end.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about the different types of power that folks can hold. And this is not just about position, but in fact, there is some legitimate power that comes with position that I would say is in both spheres, but especially in the elected official sphere. Folks are literally entrusted to do things or have been given authority to execute certain actions. There's literal power that comes with that. And in the religious space, I actually often associate the power, though it might be by position, It's often like relational because of the beliefs that people ascribe to. So like a pastor has a lot of power in their church, but when she goes to a town meeting, she might not carry the same authority because her relationship to that body is different than the one in which she might carry more authority. And so I think that kind of gets at what you were talking about before. It's like for things to happen in the religious space, it needs to happen corporately, communally, as opposed to being directed and directive. That's not to say that people don't try to do things that way and that things aren't often happening that way. But I think at their core, that's a key distinction, is that in one circumstance, the power is granted by the community, and the other, the power is cultivated among the community.
Yeah, that was well said. I mean, right along with that, it just makes me think that the immediate, easy directives, like they seem to win or like have sway in the short term, but like that's ultimately not a strategy that's effective long term.
Yeah.
Like it's when corporate power sort of grows naturally, sort of builds up slowly. When people buy into a vision together, and they buy into the relationships that they have with one another,
Yeah.
which it takes a long time, can at least. Like if that isn't the recipe for like a long-term victory. And I mean, some of me is like, we see a little bit of that in this passage. You know, like Herod is ultimately victorious at killing John the Baptist. He has his head literally on a platter.
Yeah.
But then here we are, approximately 2,000 years later, talking about this story, like being shaped by the texts, these religious texts, being shaped by what John the Baptist has done. So like in the long run, like he seems to win out.
Right.
Which gives me some hope. But man, is it like marathon hope?
Right.
And I want it to be like 100-meter dash hope.
Well, stick with me here and see if this lands with you too, because I think I'm also challenged by the political method that tends to work very often. Like this political method that Herod demonstrates of being like, oh, I'm the grand host. I'm making promises left and right, and then that promise coming back and biting me right in the butt. And the story reminds me of the story in Judges of Jephthah and his daughter, who is not named in the story, who Jephthah, coming home victorious from battle, says, whatever comes out of my gate, out of my front door first, essentially, that I will sacrifice to God. And who comes out first? Not a goat or a chicken, but his beloved daughter. And the lament of Jephthah's daughter is one that is still commemorated to this day. I think there is room for us to lament many lost daughters, especially in the land of Israel and Palestine right now. But beyond that specific, it's like another example of this moment where the tools of largesse and grandeur and just like demonstrating and wielding unfettered power can lead to some particularly devastating situations. And while there were personal choices involved in these two stories, it just seems to be kind of as you were suggesting, like the inevitable end of operating this way tends to have some element of destruction to it.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that political power is not important, that it's not worth wielding. It is, because it affects so many people. And done in this way with recklessness and without care can quite literally prove deadly too.
I really appreciate that connection. The way that when we can act, so directly and quickly and maybe even like brashly, like it can really get us in trouble, right? Just like we see with Jephthah and his daughter, and with Herod and his daughter, right? And ultimately John the Baptist.
Are you suggesting that the lesson of the story is don't trust your daughters?
No.
Because if so, I don't know that I'm...
Seth,
Seth, come on, man. We talked about this. You can't be saying stuff like this. This is what happens when you stay on Twitter too long.
God, yeah, that is true. If you stay on Twitter too long.
I'm sorry.
That part was true to your...
Everything was true.
True. No.
Sorry, I'm not trying to get you canceled.
This is like when Colin Jost and Michael Che swap jokes.
Yeah.
And then Michael Che's like, Colin, I can't believe you would say that.
I interrupted very rudely. I'm sorry.
You're fine. But in all seriousness, when you can act so directly and quickly, that just opens up like opportunities for mistakes. Like that can literally be deadly. But I think that in some ways it's safer to do things the slow, long-term, relational, communal way. Like there's plenty of time to course correct. For someone to say, hey, I don't know if this is a good idea. Like John the Baptist tries to do to Herod. Mm-hmm. And Herod's ultimately just like, well, that's interesting. You would say that. Too bad. So there's some ways in which like these approaches are at odds. But I think, ultimately that, politics has something to learn from the way the church does things. And if I'm honest, I think the church might have something to learn about actually getting things done. About having fewer general conferences and fewer meetings and fewer subcommittees and fewer statements.
Yeah.
And about doing. And that maybe, doing and being together in community, doesn't have to be one or the other. But maybe it's easier to integrate them if we're spending less time on some of the extraneous things that don't matter.
In one of those church meetings a few weeks ago at the Virginia Methodist annual conference, there was some drama around whether or not we as a body would support a resolution to apologize to members of the LGBTQ community that had been hurt by the church. There were a few people who came up with opposition to specifics in the statement that were like, I don't know if this is worded correctly or whatnot, but there were also a lot of people that came up and said, what do I need to apologize for? We had not totally 3 days, but over the course of 3 days, there's a lot of debate. We never ended up voting on it. And instead opted to, guess what, form a subcommittee.
Yeah.
Tasked with listening to the stories of queer Methodists in Virginia and their experiences with the church. And I've said to some of the folks who I was there with, it's like if we had started there, like started with an intent to listen to the harm that we've done and do it, like actually pursue reconciliation and seek forgiveness, would have felt a little bit better than feeling like we backed into it because we couldn't even agree on whether or not we needed to apologize to people. And then people seeking apologies for themselves for being accused of needing to apologize to queer people because they hold beliefs that discriminate against the queer community. And it just felt so much like we were centering the wrong voices again. And I don't know, Seth, that in that situation, having a group that is ready to get things done still would be what was best. And as hard as it was to process all of that, there was still part of me that said, we are trying to use our power in the best way possible. Did we? I don't think so. But we got to the moment of voting, and we're like, this is going to do us more harm than good. And so there's this tension I still feel even as we're having this conversation about how our power affects others. especially when we don't recognize the power that we are wielding. Because when folks stand up and still demand the respect for their power to exclude by their own choice, those our church has no longer decided to exclude by denominational policy, and to do so without consequence, without being made to feel bad. That makes me really wrestle with what we're doing. It was a really challenging experience, and as someone who doesn't identify as LGBTQ, you can only imagine what it was like to again have my value and worth and belonging debated by people who have no idea what it's like to have that experience and have it done so publicly. I don't know. I couldn't even apologize. And while I still see the value in maybe not doing something that ultimately was going to be harmful to a lot of people still, it still makes me realize that we have a lot of wrestling to do with the power that we still have, including becoming aware that we have it at all.
Thanks for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. I particularly liked your point about how actually getting things done didn't seem like that was the best move. Sometimes there's actually something like higher than that that's more important. That should come first. Just like you were talking about, that might be thinking about our power, recognizing it, and who has it, and how we've got it, and how we've exercised it in the past. Maybe if there's one attribute that makes, both political and religious leaders actually effective, it's that they've spent the time and they've done the work to grapple with their power, to think about it seriously.
Yeah, because I think if they have, they wouldn't go around making promises that could end up with people's heads on platters.
I agree with that.
I think we need to pray, Seth.
I think so too, Jonathan. Oh God, who never leaves or forsakes us, accompany us as we confront institutions that have people's heads on their platters. Make them amenable to change and strengthen us for the marathon of the prophetic life, which you modeled for us in Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, the one God, now and forever.